So I'll kick off. So hi, everybody. Welcome to this event, Freelancer's Guide to Client Management. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. So this is part of a three-part series of events to support the launch of the Work Crowd's new booklet, The Ultimate Guide to Freelancing. So it's a booklet which is specially designed to help you guys on your way, whether that's, being new to freelancing, or if you're a seasoned freelancer looking to expand your business. So we had a great webinar last week on how to grow your freelance business in 2022, which was hosted by members of the Work Crowd team. And we also have another event next week on the 22nd of June, I think it is, on how to be a happy freelancer. So do go to our events page, look at that event and sign up for the one next week. I'm Olivia Massey. I'm a customer success manager here at the Work Crowd. If you aren't familiar with the Work Crowd, we're a global network of independents across the PR, marketing and communication space. And I'm joined today by some of the members of that network. So we've got Anna King, David Bardell and Tillery. Before we kick off, I just sort of wanted to mention, please do, ask any questions you like as we go. Feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function as well. We will have some time at the end to answer any of your questions. So feel free to ask any as we go. So let's kick off then. So maybe why don't we start with you guys sort of introducing yourselves, telling us a bit about you, what it is that you do. Maybe we'll start with Anna and then go around.
Cool, thanks Olivia. Hi everybody. So my name's Anna King. I have my own copywriting and communications business called Scriptsy. It's just me. I mean, it's a business, but it is just me. So I'm effectively a freelancer. I mean, my background's originally PR. I worked in PR agencies for around 10 years after I finished university. And used to find it quite frustrating working in that environment. I enjoyed the job, but there was lots of elements of working in an agency that I didn't particularly enjoy. And I also really liked the copywriting element of it. So I thought, do you know what, that's it, I'm going to go out on my own and try being a freelancer. And I originally intended to just do copywriting, but then realized that actually my skills in PR were still kind of very much in demand, and actually it seemed silly not to use those, and actually the two work really well together. The kind of copywriting I do tends to be more editorial type, kind of blog writing, that kind of thing, but I do kind of web copy, newsletters, a bit more on the kind of shorter, slightly more kind of creative side sometimes. But it is very much kind of editorial PR kind of stuff. So the two kind of work really well together. My focus is mainly B2B, but quite broad within that. So I work with kind of everything from law firms to insurance companies, accountancy. I work with a VC. I've got a VC company on retainer. So I've done lots with startups as well. I've worked with quite a lot of startup companies, which I really enjoy. Done quite a lot around marketing. I used to write for the Work Crowd, actually. I still do write for the Work Crowd, actually. I do still write for you sometimes, yeah. So kind of all sorts, really. I mean, that's one of the things I love about it. I love the variety. I love working with lots of different types of companies, lots of different types of people, and kind of having that control over who I work with as well. And, trying to work with the companies that I like, both as companies and also the people that I like within those companies. So, yeah, I think that's probably everything from me.
David, should we come to you next?
Yeah, sorry, just unmute. Hi, hello everyone, thanks for coming. My name is David Bardell and I am a creative and strategic consultant, but I also run a little two-man thing called Bardell Pierce, so it's a small, hopefully less small soon, agency. So I've been freelancing for about 9 years, I think. Been a designer since I left uni, gradually crept into the creative director space, and I was a creative director for about 8 years maybe, and then went freelance just because lots of people kept asking me. I worked at some of the bigger agencies with big clients and kept getting people asking who weren't big, can you do that sort of thing for us, basically for less money. So then the agencies would charge us, so that made me go freelance. But since then I work for a lot, so I do two things. I either white label myself as a creative director for agencies, so that means I get to still work on the big stuff, the well-known brands that you'll have heard of, big worldwide ones, but then also personally get to work with startups and smaller things and make them bigger. So it's a real mix. I am market agnostic and media agnostic as well, so I do create the strategy and the creative, which is a little bit unusual for all media and all sizes of business and all markets. So I've got experience in most markets because of that, which is also a bit weird, a bit different. And yeah, that's me. I've been doing it for a long time and I really love it. I wouldn't change the independence. I mean, I've started a little agency, but I'm keeping that independence as part of that agency. We both are. So yeah, that's good.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. And Jody?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jody. I am American born, Canadian raised, and I've been in the UK for 17 years. I've been in the marketing space for 22 years, doing the full marketing mix, but really since probably about 2007. So this is going back. I've specialized in social and digital. So I built a couple of agencies. I've done some groundbreaking stuff. I did live video on Facebook 6 years before they offered it. So I've kind of been at the forefront of that for a long time now. I've been freelancing, similar to Anna. It's like a company, but it's just me. It's very tax effective doing it that way since 2013. And I work primarily in the private equity sector. So I'll work with PE funds or VCs evaluating businesses before they want to invest, or once they have received investment, then I go in and support the marketing teams with sales and marketing transformation, with like a big focus on digital automation, AI, all of that good stuff to try and enhance the customer experience. So I work mainly with premium products, so premium goods like Plenish was one of my clients. I work with luxury fashion, I work with media, broadcast, and in some emerging spaces. So ed tech is a big one for me, and also recruitment tech, which is a new one for me as well. So similar to David, I'm kind of agnostic to the market. I just am curious about different customer and client needs. So I'm always interested in meeting new clients or going into new fields and seeing what transferable skills or experience will help give them competitive advantage. I do work with companies seeking funds as well. I don't work too much in the founder-led space because frankly, I've got quite high day rates, which is a nice place to be in. But if it's particularly, I always have a soft spot for female founder-led startups. So I'm always happy to open my books for them and find time for them. So that's the space that I'm operating in at the moment. Well, have been since 2013, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. That was really good sort of outline of what you guys all do. So let's sort of get into it then. So the first sort of thing I suppose we'd sort of talk around is how do you secure those sort of long-term client relationships as a freelancer? Whoever wants to kick off, please do.
Shall I go first?
Go on, David.
I haven't got a strict answer to this, but generally, if you want, this is going to seem really obvious, if you want a client to be long-term, you have to do a bit of investment at the beginning is the main thing that came to mind when I knew you were going to ask this question. There's some emphasis on doing an amount of work, but that has to stop at doing it for free. So you have to do that balance between I'm going to show you that I'm really good by telling you roughly what direction the work would be, giving you a few nuggets of ideas that no one else would have thought of, for instance, in my space, but not go to the point of I'm going to do it for free. Just give them a bit of a taste of what you do, show them all the stuff you've done before, and then if they do pay, let's say they pay an initial pitch fee, or they were going to do that anyway, you just have to make sure that you really over deliver within that time they paid you for. If you can do that, and if you can shine in the first place, you're onto a massive head start. You're way ahead already, and then it's just a case of keeping on delighting them, I suppose, as you go forward. That was my answer to that question.
No, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first thing, was kind of do a good job, basically. I mean, that's in a nutshell what you just said. But yeah, I mean, obviously that's kind of number one thing, is you have to make sure that you deliver and kind of over deliver at the outset. But and then I think from then on, I mean, obviously you've got retained clients. That's one thing, which in my world, with PR is obviously much easier to get a retained client for, just because it makes much more sense in terms of what you're doing, and you can make that argument much more easily in terms of ongoing support. So that's one thing, and in that case, it's a case of really showing them and explaining to them and making the case to them why that is necessary. So what can you deliver for them? What will the future look like if you are working for them all the time, and how is that different to just doing a project? I mean, in PR, that's not too difficult to do, because PR is the kind of thing that you do gather momentum as you go, and doing a one-off project isn't, you need to build contacts and you need to build relationships. It's really making that argument to them, which is quite compelling, and you can hopefully show lots of experience of and lots of examples of why and how that's the case. In the case of my copywriting stuff, I do have a lot of clients that come back to me. And again, that's obviously making sure that you're answering the brief, and that you're doing the kind of thing that they're looking for, but also just being quite proactive and forward about it. Like, I will go back to clients if I've got a bit of free time and say, do you need any help at the moment? Just sending them an email, do you need any help right now? Or asking them whether anyone else in the business needs any help. Like, do they have any colleagues? If they're happy with the job you've done, do they have any colleagues in other departments who might need the kind of support that you've provided? And again, and putting forward ideas as well. So like Dave mentioned as well, coming forward with kind of nuggets of things that you can provide for them, or value that you can add for them. That works quite well with PR. If you can send them an opportunity, or something, it'd be great to get you commenting in this space, and sending them some kind of ideas across. So it's kind of showing that you can add that value, and being really proactive about it, and not being scared about going to them and kind of suggesting and asking. And yeah, that would be my advice, really.
I would also add to that, that's a good point. Honesty seems to get it seems to ensure longevity. If at the beginning you say something, not on purpose, but if you are naturally honest about, I can do a good job for you, but there are some things that I might say which you might not agree with, or you might not have known, or you may be doing some things wrong. And if you can be honest and be able to back that up with the proof of that, that goes a long way in longevity, because that you've said some things that other people may not have said because they're afraid to say it, or they don't want to offend the client because they've done something that was wrong. If you can say that in a nice, polite way, of course, then that aids longevity as well, I think.
Definitely. Thanks, David.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because I come from North America originally, I'm maybe blunt to a fault with my clients, which is something they've kind of come to expect from me. I think definitely working in the private equity sector, they appreciate that for sure. But speaking to sort of the piece of the value add, I think certainly for myself, because I work on big transformation projects, and I'm really trying to look at sort of foundational work when it comes to sales and marketing, there's always little tricks that people miss. So anytime you can deliver, like, I hate, it's a silly jargon, but a quick win. So something that they could implement very quickly in a very straightforward way that will demonstrate your thinking, your approach, the fact that you can see things that, well, you may have like a bigger vision for them. There's some simple things that won't cost a lot that you can do at the outset, builds a lot of goodwill, and understanding that, and trust, where, they may have had relationships with other consultants or other agencies previously that they were slightly mistrustful of, that led to a relationship breakdown over the long term. you sort of almost are coming up against that as well. So building trust where others may have broken it previously, anytime you can deliver something that is quick and easy for them to implement, that they understand and will deliver some sort of result for them, is really, really helpful to building that relationship over the longer term, because you're someone who will deliver quickly while you're sort of working on bigger change with them.
No, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, that element of trust for sure, between you and the client. And as you were guys all saying then, so that client relationship is obviously the most important thing. So once you've sort of won your client, I know that in a perfect world, you would deliver these amazing quick wins. They would be like, amazing, you have a perfect working relationship, no issues whatsoever. But as we all know, sometimes that's not the case. And as you said, Jolly, just then, they could have had previous relationships that had gone a bit worry. So they're a bit, worried about things. And sometimes there can be sort of issues that may arise. So it'd be great to hear, your guys' thoughts on sort of how you can handle these situations, should they arise, sort of how to prevent them arising, and also maybe sort of, as David was saying earlier, having those sorts of difficult conversations. How would you go about that?
I mean, certainly for me, something that I found really valuable, and I'm looking forward to the Work Crowd's, Freelancer guide that's coming out. I myself, when I started this year coming back from my maternity leave, really wanted to hone in on, who I wanted to work with and be a lot more proactive in my relationships, having been burned previously by, not paying clients. We've all been there. And there's an individual, his name is Terry Rice. You can find him on LinkedIn. He's an American. He has a free course, and the part of it really looks at interrogating your clients. So before you get to work with them, or if you're working on a project, making sure that you're asking the right questions so that you're really clearly defining that scope and constantly revisiting that and constantly sense checking that with them, so that you have an open dialogue about what you're going to achieve, that they're really clear and you're really clear about the scope of the project, so that hopefully you can head things off before they go awry, because you've had really open conversations and really honed in on what their expectation is. At the same time, when you're doing that interrogating, which I find fantastic, if it's something that you don't think is going to work, or you have to sort of challenge it, at least it gives you an opportunity to have a conversation around that, or sort of define the scope of the project, or, in some cases, walk away from the project altogether because it's not workable. So I think the more that you can talk with your client, define the scope, really interrogate them as much as they interview you. It's Terry, Terry Rice. The more you sort of interrogate them as their client, the stronger position you'll be in, and hopefully head off any of those conflicts before they happen.
I would say that, I know you probably heard this many times before, but intuition is massively, as you get a little bit older, you learn to really trust that. It seems like a cliche, but you'll notice every time you come across a client where there are difficult conversations, and you go through those conversations and realize that this is a project you maybe shouldn't have taken on in the first place. If you think back, there are always pointers to that. You do get that feeling that I'm not sure about this, and you learn to trust that eventually. And so that's something that everyone should really take notice of more. I wish I took notice of it more in previous years.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That was one of my points, was if you think they're going to be really difficult, if you think that there's a chance that this kind of thing is going to happen, then don't take them on as a client in the first place. Like, you do get that kind of sense if people have really unrealistic expectations, for example, in terms of what they want, or if they're not sure what they want, or if they are combative or whatever when you're having those initial conversations, or you feel like they're trying to drive you down too much on how much you're trying to charge, for example, chances are that client's going to cause you problems, and like David said, you're probably going to regret having taken them on in the first place. And obviously that's difficult when you're just starting out. That is obviously really difficult to do when you're just starting out, and you might have to just go through a few of those really difficult experiences in the outset, just to kind of get that experience, I suppose. But you need to kind of respect your abilities and what you offer, and try not to take on those clients that are going to just cause you pain, I think. And obviously there are, you know, as Jadis said, there are obviously ways that you can, there's always going to be difficult conversations with any client, and obviously those are conversations you have to have. But I think it's trying to identify those clients who are just being unreasonable as early as possible, really. I'm trying to think if I had anything else to say. Oh, and also just, you know, when this does come up, you do need to just have the confidence, like David said, trust your intuition, trust your instinct, and have the confidence to be direct and be, you know, very matter of fact about it. Try not to, you know, you need to try and come to an outcome that works for everybody, but try not to let it get to you personally. These things are never personal. They are people doing business, and people, each person having their perspective from where they're coming from. So you need to try and just distance yourself from it, and put your perspective and use your knowledge and your experience, and put that forward in a kind of non-emotional way, and try to, and that generally goes down really well with clients. They generally respond to that really well, to be honest. You're just open and honest and transparent, and then you can come to kind of a resolution.
Yeah, I would say, and this is difficult. All these points are difficult when people are just starting out. But really, you're freelance because you're good at something, and you know that people will hire you personally for those things. And so there's this lack of confidence in the beginning that, oh no, I've gone freelance, that's the end of everything. I'm never going to get any work. I'm not going to get enough work. But in fact, you've probably gone freelance because you know that you're good and you can separate yourself from the agency space. So if you do have that confidence, I would say that your integrity is more, you said earlier, Olivia, that the experience that the customer has and the relationship is the most important thing, and it is. But related to that is your integrity, and I think that stands above the customer relationship and affects it. So it's a circular thing. If you can keep hold of your integrity and think, I don't want to do that because of these reasons, that will influence the customer relationship and make it good, and it will get rid of relationships that aren't good and keep ones that are. And people will respect you for saying something that's true, or saying you can't do something, or saying that you, as Jadis said, suggesting things that they might not have heard of, or might be a lot cheaper. They're planning on paying you X amount to do Y, and you say, well, actually, you're better off doing this, and I'll do that for you, and then you get more work out of that in the long run.
Definitely. I think that's a really interesting point, that idea of, you know, your integrity and you are the freelancer being the most important thing. Just a question that came up in my head sort of as you were saying that. So someone who has just started out, then say they do find themselves working with a client that on reflection they maybe shouldn't have done, and it's not, maybe there was more work than they initially thought, or, you know, they're sort of being asked to do more things, maybe in more hours than they'd want. What would be your advice to sort of have that conversation of, you know, look, this isn't what I want? How would you guys sort of navigate that situation?
I would just be honest, just put it out there. You haven't got anything to lose. If it's not working anyway, and you continuing as it is, it's just going to probably damage your reputation, because they're not going to be happy, you're not going to be happy, everyone's just going to get more and more annoyed about the situation. You've got literally nothing to lose by just putting it out there and saying, look, wanted to have an honest conversation for these reasons. This isn't what I thought, this has come up, this is not what I expected. Can we work on this? Can we change what we're doing in some way that is going to overcome those problems, whether that's you need to pay me more money or you need to give me more time, or whatever it is, or we need to change how we work. You know, and the worst that they can do is say no. And okay, fine, you've been honest, you've said, you've put your position forward, and if you lose them, fine, that's the way it's going to be. You're not going to be happy working with them anyway. So, and in my experience, actually, clients are very, very, very receptive to that kind of thing. And actually, I mean, it may just be that the chemistry is wrong, and fine. It might just, okay, be one to put down to experience. But a lot of the time, that can actually be a bit of a kind of watershed moment where things, okay, this is where things are going to change, and actually, you can then come out with a really much better situation as a result of it.
Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah, and it doesn't just happen at the beginning either. Even when you've been working a long time, you still get clients that do this. I've got a client right now who I'm doing a video for, and they don't have experience in video, and you've got to kind of appreciate that a bit. So they thought they would, you know, they think they know, yeah, we want this and we want this kind of thing, but what they don't realize is that there are points at which you should assess what you've got and then amend things or add things or change things, and that there are points where it's too late, like the video's done and it's gone, and if they don't realize those things, you're going to have to accommodate the fact that they don't have experience in that. And if that hasn't been stated at the beginning well enough, which in this case, and this was only this month, and I'll admit I look back and think, yeah, maybe that wasn't expressed as well as it could have been. So then you learn from that, and you learn, right, I'm either going to express that a lot more strictly, and I'm going to state you get this at this point and this at this point, or I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to do the amends anyway for the price that you said. And then you learn from it, like you said. But you'll still be doing that going forward forever, just less, hopefully.
Yeah, I think to David's point, I really go back to my scope of work, so I really hold on to that. And certainly when they're asking for more, it's having an open conversation to say, okay, well, this was the defined scope. Would you like me to go in this direction? If so, I'm going to have to compromise on this, or it's going to, be some extra time. I can give you that, but you tell me what's the priority. And that sort of comes with time and confidence, having a clearly defined scope. But I think get in the habit of it from the beginning. Otherwise, you will be compromised on your time, and that ultimately, compromises your money, your earning potential. So yeah, sticking to that scope of work, using that as the reference point for the more difficult conversations, so that they can tell you what their priorities are, as opposed to you sort of changing based on something that came up in one conversation and might be from one individual, but actually the business goal is this. So that is kind of counter to that. So always just go back to that scope of work and really challenge it, and use that as your framework for having those tough conversations.
That actually sort of leads me on to another question that's just come into my head as you were saying that. How would you guys sort of navigate, if you're working with maybe a bit of a larger team, and there's maybe some more difficult characters in the team, rather than the whole team being difficult, if there's a couple of people who are a bit difficult, how would you sort of navigate that situation if there's one or two sort of characters who are, a little bit on the difficult side?
Go above them and get them fired. No, I'm joking. It's just exactly the same thing. You just have to talk to that person, the people that are being difficult. There's a reason, and it's usually they didn't quite understand what they were taking on, or they still don't quite understand what's going on. And so usually, like you said, Shadish, if you explain and if you say, well, this is what's going on and this is the problems we're having, they don't even realize half the time. They don't realize that the photographer, you sent a photographer somewhere, and they get there and they're not allowed to take photos in the room that they thought they were taking. And so the photographer's ringing you, and the client doesn't even realize they're not being difficult. It's not their fault usually. It's just something they didn't realize. Yeah. I would say also on a practical level, if you're going to try and approach a difficult client or a difficult person within a client, write what you want to say completely, with everything in it, all the swear words, the lot, then don't send it. And then do it the next day, and then delete all of that and put the nice version, because you'll always regret sending something immediately. You have to wait a little while.
That's a good practical tip. Good practical tip. Sleep on it.
Yeah, totally. I think you can, particularly with emails, you can easily misread things, or take something the wrong way because you're in a mood about something. So you've taken something just because of something that's going on your side of things, or you're feeling a bit sensitive, or it's something that you put, you're always a bit sensitive about, whatever. And someone's very direct on email or something, and you can read it and think, oh, that person's really having a go at me. And then 24 hours later, you read it again and you think, oh, actually, it's not that bad. Actually, they probably just mean this, you know, and things can, you know, have different ways of working. And like David said, it's generally not that they're trying to be difficult, it's because the pressures that they're under or whatever. And or just because it's the way that they communicate, and that's fine. And yeah, trying to understand them, trying to really understand where they're coming from, pick up the phone, like having a phone conversation is usually better. If you're worried about something, if I'm worried that someone's in a bit of a mood with me about something, I will generally call them, and then it just diffuses the whole thing normally, because you can just have a chat and kind of talk about the weather and try and kind of talk as people rather than as kind of client and provider.
And that's a really good point, Anna, is that people have different communication styles. And in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's become apparent to all of us that we all have very different brains. For instance, neurodivergence is becoming more, everyone's becoming more aware of that. And some people just are blunt. Like you were saying, Jardis, you communicate very bluntly. I think that might be a national characteristic, but everyone is different. Some people send you an email and you think that's really rude, but in fact it's not. It's just that they communicate like that. So yeah, you have to bear that in mind nowadays. Just basically give it a couple of goes before you reply, or before you respond to something that you think is one thing and in fact it's another. All keeps the relationship ticking over.
Yeah, I think I'm in a slightly unique position in that I'm asked to come into companies and assess people, like assess how they operate within a team. So to the points made by, you know, Anna and David, you kind of do need to take it on a not a personal level, but you need to get more personable with them, understand who they are, maybe, you know, talk about some of the things that they're struggling with, you know, their pain points, you know, their frustrations, you know, that sort of thing, to get a sense of that it's not, you know, it's not down to you. So, you know, some people are just really not happy in their jobs, and that's hard to overcome when you're, you know, the freelancer or the consultant coming in, you know, to do a job. And that's when you have to sort of rely on the wider team and maybe have sort of a quiet word with the individual that's brought you into the team, if the person you're having conflict with isn't necessarily, you know, your direct report, or you know, the person who's brought you in to do a scope of work. But anytime you can sort of relate to someone on a bit more of a personal level and understand who they are, you know, to David's point about, you know, neurodivergence, really recognizing that people do communicate differently and may not necessarily think that something's slightly abrasive when they've said it. I'm definitely, you know, guilty of that. Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. David, did you want to say anything else?
I'm just going to say I'm also guilty of that. We based our agency on it, on being truthful and abrasive, a little bit abrasive, but people want the truth. It's just it sometimes takes a little while for them to get used to it. That's all.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. That's really, really helpful. Some really, really helpful points, and some really good sort of tangible things that you can do there. So I suppose moving on to less of the sort of complex side and more on the happy client loving you side. You know, obviously the sort of goal of any sort of thing is to try and make your client's life easier. Sometimes that's not always possible, as we've discussed. Sometimes they've got to go through some pain points to get to that easy space. But do you guys have any sort of tips or sort of tools that you use to make your client's life easier? Who's going to go first?
I'll go first. I don't have an answer, but I'll go first. I think this gets down to specifics for me anyway. So because my job is quite wide ranging, every time I tell someone I'm a strategic creative director, they go, and what does that mean? What do you actually do? There are so many different things that for the individual things I over the years work on things to make their life easier. So as an example, if I'm doing naming, I do a lot of company naming, and it's an involved process. It's iterative. It's not just here's 200 names, pick one. It has to be done for a reason. It has to be based on the company's strategy. If it's not aligned, it won't work. It has to involve all stakeholders, leadership, sometimes all staff as well. And so there's a lot of things you can do to make life easier on, let's say, you've got you've got it down to 30 or 40 names in workshops, and then you have to choose. So at some point you have to make a decision, and that a lot of clients find decision making really difficult. So in that instance, I've got a worksheet and it's interactive, and I send it to everyone and they can put in their top 5 names. They can then mark individually in columns, and then it adds up, and then that makes it apparent to them what they're thinking. And I think that's a bit of a commonality amongst the stuff that I give to clients to help them out, is that it's often just that they don't know, there's too much stuff, and it's our job to make sense of that stuff. But especially in strategy, it's not my phrase, it's I've forgotten his name, but it's a really good phrase that I live by, and it is after mess is success, or before success is mess. Everything is a total mess, and the client will just see that. You need to channel that mess down and try and get them to the end point. Most things that I do involve some element of that, helping the client by getting the mess out of their heads and making them see that it's not actually that much of a mess. There is some stepping stones to get to where they want to get to.
Yeah, and that's a bit similar to what I was thinking in a way. I mean, I am basically a very impatient person. I like things to, this is part of the reason that I had to be a freelancer, because I hate when things take too long. I like things to just happen. And when it's just me, I can just make things happen much more quickly. And this obviously doesn't necessarily work in all areas of marketing necessarily. I think there's some areas you have to be more patient, but you know, I just always try and make sure I come to my clients with solutions. I know it's such a cliche, come with solutions, not problems, but I don't like having to wait for my clients to come up to make decisions about things, you know, because sometimes they don't know the answer. So sometimes I just try and tell them what I think the answer is, and then they can either tell me that it's not right, or they can go, yeah, that's great, rather than waiting, you know, because that's just what holds projects up, is if you're waiting for weeks and weeks on end for the client to come back to you with an answer about stuff, when actually maybe you can do that thinking for them, and try and kind of tell them what you think the answer might be. I mean, this works a lot with kind of the stuff I have to write, obviously, because a lot of the time people don't know what they want to write, they just kind of have a vague idea, so you have to do it a lot in that situation. But same with PR, you know, you can just kind of start moving forward with things in a way. If you find that things are moving too slowly, and that can be a, you know, and then sometimes that can be a cause of dispute, because they think it's your responsibility and you think it's their responsibility. Actually, you know, you be the one that's really kind of pushing things forward, and rather than necessarily waiting for things to move forward at their end. That's particularly with this kind of types of clients that I work with, particularly with smaller companies, I think, where they don't necessarily have the expertise, or they don't necessarily have the resources internally. I think that's definitely something that clients really value in the way that I work, because I just kind of get on with things basically, rather than waiting for any specific direction sometimes, if that makes sense. Waffle.
No, that's a really good point. There's a client which Olivia will know that we have that we both had talks with, that are really good, and they're not that small, but they're also not that big. You'd call them a kind of a middle client, wouldn't you, Olivia? And they're really good at if you just tell them what he's doing next, and this is what he's doing, and this is how you should do it, they just go, okay, that's great, and it makes them move forward a lot faster. Yeah, it's a really good point.
I think those are all really great points, kind of on a macro level. I'm thinking maybe some of the people who've joined the webinar today might look for really practical tools as well. So, you know, some organizations have tools in place already, but if not, you know, recommending something like Trello for project management, or Airtable for housing documents, or, you know, a centralized location that can be shared both internally and with external sort of suppliers, are tools that I use a lot. Sometimes clients will have their own tools, which are quite often spreadsheets or Google Docs, and you have to sort of fit your way of working into what their expectation is. I think, you know, I had one client in particular who wanted a weekly rundown of everything I've done not necessarily been in micromanaging process like that before or since. But when I was sort of working with that client, I just made sure that I allocated time within my day to work within their system so that it wasn't eating into my time, if you see what I mean. So they want me to use that tool. Great. I'm going to need an hour of my working day to be able to, utilize that tool and that form that you've asked me to use, because my way is way more efficient and I could do this a lot easier and I'm not taking it out of my time. So, just making sure that you aren't, if they'd like you to use a specific tool, that you're not sort of doing that in your outside hours. Do it within your contracted hours.
I think that's a good point as well, with sort of setting key boundaries around your time. As a freelancer as well, I think, quite a lot of people when they're starting out sort of talk to me about how they can be tempted to sort of work, much longer on a project. I'm sure everybody is often tempted, and you find yourself working a lot longer on a project than you'd initially thought you should. So yeah, do you guys sort of set sort of strict boundaries with your time with clients? How do you sort of navigate that?
For me, a lot of projects are scoped out beforehand. So you have either spent the time working out the client we were just talking about, Olivia. That was you have to work out first, spend some time working out, right, this is going to take, let's say, 9 days, 10 days to do, and stick to that. And if it goes over that, then that's on you, unfortunately. Or it's a project which is X amount and its days aren't mentioned, and you're just going to charge that amount to do that thing, which obviously is more beneficial for all of us because we get to say that price and we have to do it for that. However, if it then goes on and on, then you're not in a great position. So you just have to make sure that beforehand you have scoped out roughly how long it's going to take. And you, again, I'll say you'll still be doing this as it goes on, as time goes on, because you're going to come up against projects that you love, and in those cases you're going to spend twice as long on them just because you're really enjoying them, really liking working on good meaty projects, unfortunately. But that's why we love this job, I suppose, because we get to have that flexibility.
Exactly. Thanks, David. Did anyone else want to say anything on that? No. Okay,
mine's pretty much the same, really, in terms of the having to work out how long things take before you do them. Or then there's a retainer. If you do a retainer, I have a certain number of days. I do a month, and then you can always balance it out. If you don't do very much one month, you can kind of do more the next month, and then if you're consistently going over, then obviously you can let the client know, and hopefully they can pay you a bit more. That's the other way I work.
Fab. So it's nearly sort of time for questions, but just sort of one other point that I wanted to touch on. In terms of when you come to the end of a client relationship, whether that be sort of maybe end of a project, or you've wrapped everything up and there's maybe possibility of extension, but you don't really want to, or things like that, sort of in terms of ending client relationships, whether it's in a great way or maybe in a not so great way. How would you guys sort of give tips on sort of saying goodbye, I suppose, to your clients?
I could answer this first. If you come to the end of a project and it's a blessed relief because you're thinking, I really shouldn't have done this, or I don't want to do it again, then it's fairly easy to just say that you're busy. And once you've said you're busy a few times, they generally won't come back. But that's unfortunately the flip side of that is, if you are really busy and you've got a nice client who you actually like working with, but you're too busy, they will also only ask you 2 or 3 times, and then they won't come back because they'll find someone else who could do the job the same as you can. So basically say you're busy. That's what I would do.
Yeah, that's so true about them. It's really annoying when you are actually genuinely busy. You don't want to get rid of them. I find just doing that once and you can lose people. That's really one of the big frustrations, to be honest, of just being one person. And you think, oh, if only I had a clone that I could give this to work on. And yeah, I mean, my advice would be, just to be kind of as professional and as gracious as possible. Always take the high ground. You know, in any situation, you never know when you're going to come across people again. So just be as helpful and as professional as possible at all kind of stages, even, you know, whatever has gone on before, because yeah, it will definitely stand you in good stead in terms of your reputation going forward. And, you know, there may have been people within the team that perhaps it didn't go, you know, that it didn't necessarily click with, but there may be other people in the team who it did, and they again may go on to different companies in the future. And, you know, that's how you build your freelance network, is through these things happening. So you need to kind of just try and be friends with everybody.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add other than I use Busy a lot.
No, fair enough. All right, brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. So if anyone does have any questions, we do have some time now for them. I don't think there's any outstanding questions at the moment, but do correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. But if there aren't any sort of questions, I actually have a question. But basically, I wanted to sort of maybe ask a little bit around, now that we're sort of coming, fingers crossed, out of COVID a bit more, and quite a lot of sort of companies are expecting their permanent staff to be in the office more. I know that with freelancing, there's always been that element of remote working, but do you guys sort of, A, I suppose, find that clients are wanting more face time? And B, do you feel that that's beneficial in terms of developing relationships, or do you prefer to be remote? Do you think there's not much difference?
I think it depends on the project. I have started doing face-to-face workshops, for instance, because they're just a lot better face-to-face, and you get that feedback that you can't possibly get. Over the last couple of years, and before that actually, I perfected online workshops. So you can do different things with whiteboards and sending out things and then doing things on Zoom, but it's never the same. And so I've got one this Friday. I'm going to do a face-to-face workshop, just because they're a lot better and you get a lot more interaction. And the customer, you get to know them, and you get to know all the other people in the room as well. And that's always good for your network and for future work with that client. It's always good. However, I also like the freedom of working wherever I'm working from, whether that's at home or, you know, in a cafe somewhere or at someone else's home. I really like that. And so if depending on the project, you're given two projects, let's say. One is you can work from home if you want to, or you can come in for a briefing and then work from home. And the other is you have to work with us. Then there'll be two, usually for me personally, there'll be two pricing structures, and it will cost more if you want me to come in the office. And if I'm too busy to do both, I just won't do the one that is in the office, to be frank, if it's a project that doesn't benefit from personal face-to-face. Because let's be honest, some projects, if you're doing something on your own and you're deep within, let's say copywriting, a lot of copywriting, especially because I do a bit of that, but only headlines, you know, advertising, things like that, not long form copy, but it's still generally, apart from the inspiration bit, a solitary job for me is anyway. And coming in won't help that, and keeping on saying, you know, how's that going? Can I see what you've done today? That's not going to help it at all. So I wouldn't do that. So yeah, long answer for it depends on the project, but it's great seeing people again. Really nice. You forget just how nice it is. You think that you know what you've missed, but when you get there, there's so many subtleties that you've completely missed and you didn't realize you were missing. It's really good.
Which one of you is going to go next? Why don't we'll start with Jodie and then we'll come to Anna. How's that?
And muted at the same time. So yes, I would definitely agree with what David has said. I think for me, again, because I'm going in and evaluating teams and processes, and I sort of have to unpick a lot of stuff that they're not telling me the in-person and the face-to-face is really helpful to me. If I'm doing deep strategy work or like that really, you know, complex thinking, like I can't do that in a sociable environment. Like that's not how my brain works. I'm dyslexic. Like I need my own quiet, focused space. So it will always be a hybrid for me. But for me personally, I enjoy, and actually I do need to go in and see people face to face. So it actually makes my life a lot easier now that we're able to do that again, because you miss a lot virtually when you're trying to make an assessment of someone, understand sort of, you know, their personality, their ways of working, dynamics within a team. I can't necessarily assess that over a 1 hour Zoom call. You know what I mean? So I don't mind going in, but it's, again, I'm the one who defines that parameter, and I'm certainly not going to be going in 4 or 5 days a week for a client. Like, no way, because then I can't get what I need to do done as well on top of that. So
yeah, and I mean, I don't tend to see my clients very often. I mean, like with a long-term client at the outset, I would definitely, if it was like a retainer, if it was, you know, if possible, I would definitely go for, I do quite a lot of kind of bits and pieces actually. So it just doesn't really make sense to go and see everybody. It's not a particularly good use of my time. But I mean, like David said, you know, it's really valuable when you can do it. I've just got back from maternity leave as well, so I feel like I haven't actually done anything like that for ages. But you know, it is, if clients have events and things like that, I do always try and show my face, because they really appreciate it. It is really nice just to get to know people properly in person. But for my day-to-day job, I would say it's probably not that necessary, really. And I haven't particularly had any increased pressure from clients to do that either. And also because I work with quite a lot of international people who aren't even in the same country, so for them it's not even an option really. So yeah, it depends what you do. Like totally, like for workshops, I can totally see that that's obviously much better in person. Of what I do, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference.
Yeah, that's and international clients have increased as well, haven't they? I've found, because of lockdown, because people have realised, oh, we don't need the person who's down the road. We can, for some projects anyway. Yeah, I've noticed that that's increased. And some agencies that, like I meant, I don't do so much of this now, but some agencies who white label you as a creative director, they used to want you in, but now the experience they've had over the last 2 years has meant that they've realised they don't need you in, and you can do that without coming in. So that's also good. Means you can sit in the garden on days like this and work there.
Brilliant. No, it's true, with the nice weather. Well, fingers crossed that it stays around, but who knows with England. So listen guys, I'm just conscious of time, so if anybody anyone who's joined who has any other questions, do feel free to pop them in the chat, and we can always get them answered after the webinar. We'll send out a recording of this webinar to everyone who's attended, and everyone who couldn't make it as well, and we'll also send you guys a link to download the freelance booklet as well, so do download that. Remind you again to please sign up for the event next week on the 22nd, but I wanted to just say an absolutely huge thank you to Anna, David and Jardi. This has been super informative, super helpful, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you guys. So thank you guys so much for speaking on the panel today, and thank you everybody who's joined as well. I hope that you've learned something, because I know that I definitely did. So yeah, thanks so much everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks Olivia. Thanks everybody.
Thanks guys. Bye. Bye.